here with one more flipped classroom video. 3 tips before we start. You can always speed up or slow down this playback speed if that helps you get through the video. Second, you can pause the video at any time and catch up on your notes. Last, you can turn on the captions and watch my words go by on the bottom of your screen. Today we're going to have a lesson on measures of dispersion. And to remind you of what that means, the measures of dispersion are talking about how far the data is spread out. So remember, our first few lessons were on central tendency, which is about how the data groups together towards a central point. And we had 3 measures to look at that. Now we're looking at data spread. Finally, there's range. Now, range is just the difference between the largest data value and the smallest data value. So the bigger the range, the more spread out your data will be. Finally, interquartile range. This is a little bit more complicated, but it's kind of like range, except that it has a nice feature of excluding the outliers. So the interquartile range is just the third quartile minus the first quartile. And before we jump into that, the quartiles are pretty straightforward conceptually. You just take your data, organize it in order, and the first quartile is the first 25%, the second quartile is the second 25%, the third quartile is the third 25%, and then the last quartile is the remaining 25%. So the interquartile range is the value of the third quartile minus the first quartile. So it gives you a feeling for the range, but kind of like in the middle of the data. So let's take a look at that. Let's do an example that will help us show what the interquartile range is. So we're going to do this in a manual method, but just know your calculator will do this automatically for you. So again, make sure you know how to do the statistics functions on your calculator. So here's our data. We've got a bunch of biology exam scores. These are organized in order, which is the most helpful method for figuring out things like median and mode and stuff like that. So I've put them all here. I've got 22 terms, okay, pretty nice. Now, to start this, we need to find our median. So remember, our median is the middle value. It's the value for which all the data, half the data is above and half the data is below. So if I have 22 pieces of data, the median is going to be between the 11th and the 12th term. And so I've organized this with 11 terms on the top row and 11 terms on the bottom for our total of 22. So our median is right here. That's the median. And so what we do with that is we calculate the average of the terms adjacent, because I don't actually have a middle term. I have an even number of terms, so the median is going to occur between the 2 middle-ish terms. So it's going to be the average of 62 and 62. So we know here this data set has a median of 62. Okay, so to figure out the interquartile range, we have to figure out the values for the first quartile and the second quartile, or the third quartile, so that we can subtract the first from the third to get that special range that we're after. So first off, let's figure out the first quartile. This is the middle of the first half of the data. So we can look at this. We have 11 terms right here. So we have an odd number of terms, which means we're going to get a middle term in here. Now, you could just look at this and go, well, let's see. I have 5 here to get to 45, and then I have 5 here to get the rest of the way up to 62. So my first quartile is going to be the 46 right there. That's going to be my Q1. But there's also a formula that helps you do that. So if you want to do it that way, you can. What you do is you take your n, the number of terms for your first half. So that's n equals 11. And then you do n plus 1 over 2, which is going to be 12 over 2, which equals 6. So that means it's the 6th term, or the 6th data point. So then I could just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that gives me my 46 as well, okay? So here we go, Q1 equals 46. Now I want you to pause the video and do the same thing for the second half. Okay, I did the same thing for the second half of the data to find my Q3, and this data is all lined up nice on the page, so I can just go right to the 6th term in the second half and get 78 for my Q3 value. So 78 is the middle value in the upper half, which gives us the third quartile. So this is the third quartile, that's the fourth quartile, and of course this string of data is the first and that's the second. So if you remember from the last board, the interquartile range is Q3 minus Q1. So that's what I've done here. IRQ, interquartile, oops, it's IQR. Let's get that right. IQR is 78 minus 46, or 32. Now that's a measure of the spread that excludes any outliers. Like, you might consider maybe some of these scores to be outliers because they're so low, or you might consider these two scores to be outliers. So the interquartile range doesn't factor those in. It's just the middle of the second half minus the middle of the first half. So in some ways, this is a more stable, representative measure of the spread of your data. Now finally, let's do the range. That's really quick. I want you to pause the video and do that calculation for me. Okay, range is just the maximum value minus the minimum value. So let's put that right here. I'm running out of space. Range equals max minus min, which then is going to equal my 98 minus my 18. 98 minus 18, which gives us a range of 80. So that's the range for this data. Now that you've watched the video, take a moment to jot down any questions so you can bring them to our next class. Remember that you can always watch the video again to deepen your understanding. If you enjoyed the video, please click like or subscribe.